So, without further ado, please welcome Tim Crowley.
Good morning. Kay, thank you for those kind words. I'm just going to cannonball right into this experience. I want to say thank you for taking time to be here, and hopefully this will be impactful for you and that you can leave here with ideas how to impact others in your lives. Take your right hand and hold it straight up in the air, and then stretch it to the right as far as you can without tickling the person's ear or touching their hair or adjusting their glasses. This represents your birth date, okay? This is the day that you're born, the day that you arrived on planet Earth. Take your left hand, stick it up in the air, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to expand it to the left as far as you can. This is the day that you leave this planet Earth and go to wherever your next life is. This is the day you sell the farm, you kick the bucket. What you have in front of you, ladies and gentlemen, this is your lifeline. Play along with me. Be all in. Take off all the years you've lived. I'm 60 years old, so I got to chop off 60 years. By the way, this is supposed to be an inspiring talk this morning. And then once you've done that, do this. Take off another third, because most of us in this room are probably going to work that. And right before your eyes, you're seeing your life shorten very quickly. And now take off another third, because pray God we get some sleep. And what I want you to do right now is take what you've got left of your life and take a good hard look at it for a moment. Take a good look at this. Drop your hands. I'll keep mine here. I have a question for you. What does diversity and inclusion, honoring both of those, have to do with creating an impactful life, a great life, a meaningful life? What does it have to do with that? And I'm looking for a one-word answer, and it begins with the letter E. Everything. How many of you, by show of hand, at the end of your life, you want to look back and say it was a life of meaning, it was a life of purpose, that you made a difference in the lives of others? I have a question for you. What holds most people back? What stops most men and women from actually acquiring that? What holds most people back in life? Fear? So as psychologists, we study fears. It's the top 10 list of fears. The number one fear for most Americans, especially college students, is what? I guess I'm doing it now. Fear of public speaking. You know where death falls on that list? It's number 7. People would rather die 7 times over than do this. But there's a fear that I want us to explore today, because if we don't address that fear, I doubt that we'll expand our experience with really validating and appreciating and celebrating differences and being more inclusive. What are other common fears that hold people back? That have maybe held you back, friends, coworkers, colleagues, neighbors? Failure. Think of both of those. Think of failure. Think of all the things that have not been started or because people were afraid of doing something. And you said it, Nelson Mandela says, more than fear of failure, fear of success. So my name's Tim. To go through life kind of being myself takes a little bit of energy, but to bring my best self, for you to bring your best self to everything you do every day, that takes guts. There's another fear that I'm talking about, and we haven't mentioned it yet. We experience it all the time. It has a lot. Who said change? Just do this. So fear of change. It has a lot to do with that one. It's fear of leaving our comfort. Finish it for me. Zone. Watch this by show of hand. And I'm going to have you vote this morning a lot with your hands. This is like a really strong yes, and you can make some fun sounds. This is still pretty strong yes. This is maybe, and this is like no way. So let me do this by show of hands. How many of you know people, or yourself at one time or another, you stayed in a job, you stayed in a relationship, you stayed in a situation that was not good for you, but you stayed because it was safe and there was comfort in it? Let me see a show of hands. How many of you would be willing to do this morning? In order to get the best use out of this very short amount of time, how many of you, by show of hand, would be willing to take some baby steps outside of your comfort zone if it could help you to leave here with a better understanding of diversity and inclusion and the willingness to take some actions to improve that in our personal lives and our professional lives and our community? How many of you will do that? Look around the room. You guys are giving me a green light to do whatever I want. So really, think of it. If we continue to do what we've done, we get what we've got. And for most of us, it's okay, but that's not really how we grow and expand ourselves. So when I say go, you'll have 10 seconds to do what I'm going to ask you to do. When I say go, I want you to get a partner. It cannot be anybody you knew prior to walking into this room. I want you to use opposite gender until we probably run out of guys. It looks like there's more women guys. You're going to be more popular than you've ever been. But I want you to be mindful, and I want you to be intentional about finding a partner, a person you've never had a conversation with. As we move into this, you've got 10 seconds to do that, and then you'll be sitting by them, ready, set, go. So, anybody without a partner? Anybody else? Right there. Boom. By the way, I grew up in an average-sized Catholic family in northwest Iowa, although St. Joseph, Missouri has been my home for the last 35 plus years. When I say average-sized Catholic family, I have 6 sisters. I understand women pretty well. I also have 6 brothers. I'm the 11th of 13 children. There were Catholic families that had 17 and 21 kids, so I'm not kidding when I said average-sized Catholic family. Today we're going to also talk about inclusion. My mom, before any of this was in literature, any of this was in research, she was just natural at it. So we lived in the south end of town. We were poor kids. We were a welfare family. We lived in HUD housing. But at night, kids used to go outside and play. There was a game called Out to See the Ghost at Night, Kick the Can. Anybody remember those games from yesteryears? If you were to come into our yard, my mom would introduce herself. She would remember your name, and she would do this upon you leaving. She would tell you to invite your mother, and mothers from the north end of town, the families that had wealth and prestige, would come and hang out with my mom. She had an unbelievable way of helping people just feel like they belong. So we're going to create some of that belonging today. Once again, everybody has a partner, right? So I'm this guy who likes to not just really tap you on the shoulder to get you out of your comfort zone. I kind of really like to push you. So not knowing what I'm going to ask you to do right now, I'm going to suggest that you and your partner are going to have to make a decision. It's probably going to be the toughest decision you've made in a while. Without knowing what I'm going to have you do between you and your partner, just decide who's going first. Ready, set, go. Make that decision. Anybody know Stephen Covey? This is what he says. Most of us, when we listen, we don't listen to hear, we don't listen to pay attention to people. We really listen more to respond. And how many of you have ever done any of these listening sins? You're having a conversation with someone and you can read their mind and you finish the sentence. You interrupt the conversation. You hijack the conversation. You finish that for them. So today when you're listening, because we're going to have lots of listening because we want to create connection, it is important that you keep the focus on your partner. If you say any words at all, I want you to say big intellectual words I learned like when I was getting my PhD in counseling and psychology, words like uh-huh and tell me more. And we're laughing, but there is something powerful when we're fully present with people. When we really give people the space to be seen and heard, we can take people that have felt invisible and make them feel visible, and people that have felt unseen their entire life and to be seen and to be validated. So, the person that's going to go first to speak, where are you? Simply, you're going to do this. When I say go, with the topic of diversity and inclusion, why are you here and what do you want to get out of this down to about an hour time? What do you want before you leave? So I did some prep work talking to people on the Human Rights Commission, other people, but we want to hear from you. What brought you here and what do you want to leave with? The better that you can share that with your partner, and then we'll share some thoughts together collectively, the more that I will adjust things and speak to really what you want and what you need most. You're each going to have about 2 minutes to talk, 2 minutes to listen. You're going to change roles on your own. Ready, set, go. Have that exchange. With that, let's dive into this word. What's this word mean to you, to any of us? I think there's lots of different meanings to this word, lots of different personal experiences with this word. How many of you, by a show of hand, ever grew up where this word was not positive but negative? In other words, let me ask this question. How many of you in this room, by a show of hand, have ever been treated in a disrespectful way because of something different about you ever in your life? Yeah, and so diversity sometimes means difference, right? What else pops up in your mind, in your head, when you hear the word diversity and you hear different?
I think of it as differences, but positive.
How about that one? So even if we've had negative experiences with it, we can begin to do something different with that. Can we begin to learn and celebrate and accept and appreciate people's differences? By the way, could you imagine if the world was all the same? It was just full of sameness? Yeah. What's that word mean? What's diversity mean? Here's a technical definition. And basically, it's any attribute in which we're different. Unfortunately, lots of terrible things happen because of diversity and differences. There's the diversity iceberg, and most decisions that we make about people are made within about 7 to 10 seconds, and it has to do with about the 20% of what we can see in people. What are those things? Does that really tell us much about people? And yet, does it tell us a lot? Does it tell us everything? It tells us some, but there's way more that's under that iceberg, right? What are things that we don't know about people that when we meet them? Like right now, I'm meeting some of you for the very first time, and you're meeting me through eye contact. What are things that we don't know about people that are under that are under the water? Past or present. What's currently going on with anything? What are their interests? What are their motives? What's their families? What are their struggles? What are their celebrations? What else? Say it again. Personality. Yeah, boy, that can be interesting at times. Personality. Someone said. Socioeconomic. Yeah, socioeconomic. Religion. Education. Political. Hobbies, interests, what people like to do for fun, what they watch on TV, if they watch TV. So why do we focus so much on that top 20%? And is there a danger in it?
Yes, I think it's easy. It's easy.
It's easy?
There is a danger.
How about this? Have you ever met someone, maybe even today, and quickly you just make assumptions. We're hardwired to that. It goes way back to the caveman time. So the caveman's going out looking for food. He sees a saber-toothed tiger, something that's new. He's making a decision to fight or flight. And so he's running back to the cave or he's fighting. That's hardwired in us. And so it's for safety. But we've evolved a lot since then. We can do better. Dr. Jerry Leninger, anybody know that guy? He actually spoke at Missouri Western several years ago. And so what an incredible career he had. He's an astronaut. He's traveled millions of miles in space. Flew on the Mir space station with 2 Russian cosmonauts. Guess how fast they were going? 18,000 miles an hour. And then there's a time where that thing got on fire and he was outvoted because there were 2 Russian cosmonauts and he was the American astronaut. He had to go outside and tether himself to that spacecraft to put this fire out. He did that, and then he looks down at planet Earth and he sees something that none of us in this room, I'm going to guess, have ever seen by our naked eye. He sees planet Earth and all the lines that are around cities and counties and states and countries, they don't exist. And in that moment, he had an epiphany, and he's devoted the rest of his life to really helping people to embrace diversity and inclusion. And with all of our differences, it's important to celebrate them, but even with all of our differences, so this man speaks all over the world. He says wherever he goes, you know what he finds? He finds people that are very similar. We pretty much have the same needs. We want to show up and we want to work hard. We want to earn a good living. We want to provide for our families, our partners. We want healthy relationships. And yet, boy, today in America, that can be a tough one, can't it? Can the number of people in this room, can we leave here today, I'm going to say a group of 60, can we make St. Joseph a better community, this group of 60 people? Can we do it? It's a small group, a town of about 70-some thousand. Can we do that? So we know this, really. It makes business sense to have teams that are diverse. You work at the casino. Is there diversity out there? Is your team better because of it? Yes. How many of you know that diversity actually makes us stronger? If we know that, why is there so much resistance, really, in this community? My son lives in Liberty, came home last week, and we ate at one of that new burger place on Frederick, and I can't remember the name of it. Anybody know what I'm talking about? It's right. What is it? Oh my gosh, it's Huckleberry's. If you've not been there, go there. You talk about spending your dollars local, do that. And then we went over to the brewery right next door and had a beer. And Nick said before he went in there, said, Dad, I wonder if I'm going to run into anybody from high school. And sure enough, he did. And there was just a celebration. He saw friends he hadn't seen for 10 years. And there was all this just fun connecting. And then, in the spirit of being inclusive, there was another guy that was kind of by himself. And we kind of invited him into the conversation. And it's not long. And he says, can I tell some jokes? And we said, sure. And he told a couple jokes, and they were funny. And he says, can I tell a racist joke? I said, please, no, don't tell a racist joke. And so he tells a couple other jokes, and they're kind of funny. You know what he does? He tells a racist joke. And it was not funny. And told him it was not funny. And asked him to stop it and not to do it again. And then you know what he said? He said, well, my black friends is what he said. They laugh at that. I said, nah, my African-American friends wouldn't do that. And we asked him not to do that. But oftentimes, and I'm not so sure earlier in my life, if I wouldn't have been a bystander to that. You know what I'm talking about? Have you ever been in a situation where somebody was treated in a way that made them feel small and you didn't say something? And so that's what we want to do differently. We can leave here never being a bystander. Does that make sense? How many know you've been a bystander from way back in elementary school? How many of you have the guts and the strength and the courage to begin to stand up for yourself and other people? That's what we need in this community. And actually, I was a little nervous doing that because that guy said he was an ex-Marine, and he looked like an ex-Marine, and I have family members that are Marines, but they're not like that Marine. What's that word mean to you? Throw out thoughts. To be inclusive means to create say it again? To be part of something. To create a space where people feel part of something. What else? Everybody has a seat at the table. And at that, not only do they get the seat, they get their voice. We want to hear. So we talk a lot about diversity. It is important to have diversity of thought and ideas. Is there more than one way up a mountain? So this is really what I learned so much from my mom, and it's common sense, but it's not common practice. By the way, most of this stuff we're talking about, doesn't it make sense here? And hopefully it makes sense here. There's that thing with the PowerPoint I was talking about. But really, this is how you know if you're working in a place that really has an inclusive culture. You will feel those things. You will feel like you belong. You'll feel respected, and you'll feel valued. There's a survey done by Coos and Posner, some leadership gurus, and they asked over 800,000 people this question. How many of you in the last year felt disrespected in your job? Guess what the percentage was? High. Let's try this out. How many of you in the last year have felt disrespected in your job at least once? Raise your hand high. So it was like put your hands up so we can just see, is 81. So it's not just if we know better, we could do better. We have to make a stand to do better. How do you, and this is where I need some information from both men and women, from everybody in this room. What do you do to help people feel like they belong? How do you let them know that they bring value? And a lot of this would maybe seem common sense, but it may be common sense, but listen to this, it's not common practice. By the way, the number one reason people leave jobs and businesses, it's usually because of a bad boss, bad manager, bad leader, and they don't feel appreciated and valued. So how do you do that specifically? So you listen to people, you take their ideas, you'll run with them, you'll do things with them, and you'll give them the credit for what they shared. Anybody know a woman that worked at Missouri Western back in the day? Her name was Edith Brown. Anybody know her? So there's about 4 or 5 of us. So Edith Brown was the queen of inclusion in my personal opinion. Matter of fact, I took a job at Missouri Western. I was going to do that job for 1 year. I stayed like 19, and primarily it was to be in that woman's presence, and I kid you not. She was an amazing person. She never met a stranger. She would get to know you immediately, and it was always authentic. There's nothing pretentious. She wanted to know who you were, and anything that you shared with her, it stayed with her. She would always remember it, and then the next time she would see you, she'd start right where you left off. She figured out one of the secrets of life, and it's not about getting. Most of us are chasing stuff and getting things. It was about giving and contributing. You couldn't be in her presence ever, really, without her making a contribution. She developed cancer. She was coming to work literally dying, and she was the happiest person in the workplace. And yet she had the spirit of inclusion. Knowing she was leaving this life, going to the next life, she had no doubt where she was going, by the way, and she was still doing an unbelievable job of helping people feel like they matter and that they belonged. She passed away. I went to her funeral an hour and a half early, and this is why she is the queen of inclusion. I wanted some time with her, some personal time with her, just to say my thanks and to silently express my appreciation and love for her. An hour and a half early, I could not get into the church. It was standing room only. I'm just asking you this, answer it yourself. Could you be better at being inclusive, being approachable, starting conversations with people? You know, by the way, she was amazing at that. We used to do that all the time. The art of striking up a conversation, it is dying fast in America, and it's because of my cell phone that's hidden under there. By the way, one of Dr. Sherry Turkle's books is called this, listen to the title, Alone Together. Alone together will never create that. How many people are doing this just to avoid this? Her second book is Reclaiming Conversations. If we want to be more inclusive, we have to strike up conversations with people. And if you're really gifted at it, like Edith was, you start the conversation, and then you use the 80-20 rule of effective communication. 80% is really what? It's listening. So she would start the conversation, she would listen, and it didn't just go in here, it would go in here. By the way, just look around this room. We have no idea what's going on in people's lives, do we? Do bad things happen to good people every day? In this room right now, could there be people that are sitting here that have a loved one that may be struggling with cancer, may be worried with finances? You're concerned about your parents, or you're worried about your kids. We just never know. But doing what you did, that creates that sense of really acknowledging people and inviting them to the table, letting them know that you care. Is the world speeding up or is it slowing down? How many of you feel like you wake up in the morning and you're like the hamster on the wheel? That you get up and you just go, you collapse, and you begin another day? Is it possible, especially in the work of diversity and creating a space where people feel seen and valued and recognized, is it possible in a world that's only going to speed up that we can slow down? Could we be more mindful? Could we be more intentional? Could we be more present as Americans? Does that have anything to do with being good at this? I'm going to say it has everything. And what if actually slowing down, you actually get more done and you get more accomplished because you're more intentional? We certainly were taught this, right? Does this not help with inclusion? What's the golden rule? Exactly. And I'll paraphrase, treat others how you want to be treated. How many of you were taught that? How many of you have seen situations in this community, in your workplaces, where people, they've forgotten it, they don't do it? You ever seen it on the belt when people are driving? Yeah. Everybody's an idiot or a maniac, right? Guess what? When it comes to diversity and inclusion, there's another rule. Another rule that's way more important. You know what it's called? Whoops, and I didn't want you to see the... It's called the platinum rule, and it tells you what it is. What was supposed to happen with this slide, you'd see the platinum rule, but you wouldn't see the definition. So I'm going to ask you, what is the definition of the platinum rule? Who said it? Treat others as? Treat others the way they want to be treated. How about that? So say your name again. So Fred, you have a whole heck of an idea about how you want to be treated more than my idea of how you want to be treated. You have a better idea of how you want to be treated than my idea of how I should treat you. You have a better idea, and yet we don't do that. What's it require in order for us to live the platinum rule? And that really was really nice and organized before I stuck it up here. What's it require for us to do? It requires us to get out of our comfort zone. We have to do something. You have to be intentional, and so that means you're going to do something. If you want to really embrace diversity and the spirit of inclusion, we have to do something. We have to put down our phones. We have to initiate conversations. We have to initiate connections with people. Do you understand that? how will I ever know what somebody wants if I don't ask them? It's so common sense, isn't it? But it is not common practice. When's the last time in a workplace somebody asked you what helps you to do your best work? How do you want to be treated? Even when it comes to being recognized and appreciated within this size of a group, some people don't like public stuff. Some people don't like any. Some people like a note. Some people like, give me the watch, give me cash, give me time off. We don't know that unless we have conversations. So when I say go, you're going to do this. I want you to move around. You're going to get a new partner, and we're going to have a conversation that is going to help you to strengthen your ability to strike up conversations, to strengthen diversity and inclusion. Here's the only thing I'm going to ask you to do, and you really have 10 seconds. Get with somebody you don't know. And I'm going to ask you also to do this. If you're sitting around a cluster of people that you work with or that you know, move to another part of the room completely. Really get out of that zone. Are you with me? Get out of the zone, move across the room. You got 10 seconds. Everybody has a partner, right? By the way, when you are in your workplace, do you always make sure that people are connected? We're going to find out ways after you have this discussion about how we exclude people all the time. We do it all the time. We have good intentions not to, but we do it all the time, and we'll demonstrate that in a few moments. But right now, I just want you to strengthen your connection. By the way, I think Dr. Linenger was onto something. How many of you, certainly when you get to know people, your idea and your experience can begin to change? It is so important that we do much more of this. Once again, it's common sense, but it's not a common practice in America anymore. So you're going to answer these 3 questions with your partner, and you're going to have about 2 minutes to talk, 2 minutes to listen, exchange on your own time, decide who's going first, answer those 3 questions, ready, set, go. I want you to measure your energy by having that conversation. You have 3 options. Your energy could have stayed exactly where it was prior to talking to your partner. It could have plummeted, or it could have gone up. What was your experience? Is that a coincidence, or is it by design?
By design.
Is there something powerful that happens out of authentic conversation? Why do we do so much of this and not enough of this? And this is just a theme I'm going to talk about till I'm done with you today. Nothing can replace this. If you want to really create atmospheres and cultures and workplaces that really honor diversity and inclusion, we have to get back to doing a whole lot of this. You just experienced what happens. What's the relevance of the first question? Why do we want to learn somebody's name? Personal connection. It empowers them. And isn't it supposed to be like the sweetest sound to our ears? How many of you like it when you meet somebody and then you see them later and you don't really even know them that well, but they remembered your name? Most of us say this about ourselves. We say this: I'm not good at remembering names. That's what we call a fixed mindset. You can switch this idea to a growth mindset, and you can say, I'm amazing at remembering names. And it's always good to see you, Deborah. And guess what? What you say usually begins to appear in your life. And then what happens if you have a meaningful conversation for just a couple moments, you're much more likely to remember that. So I'm going to encourage you to take small, simple ideas, but put them into place. Begin to learn the names of the people that you work with, that you interact with. People that work at Mosaic never go into a patient's room and not know their names or family members' names. When you embrace the families, that does something, in my opinion, to the energy in that room. So where were you born and raised? What's the relevance of that question? What's the relevance? Why is that important even? Does it demonstrate differences? And does it demonstrate similarities? Watch this. How many of you were born and raised in St. Joseph? How many of you were born and raised outside of St. Joseph? We could have some conversations. Watch this. Watch this. How many of you graduated from a high school of less than 50 people? Raise your hand. Put them up high. Be proud. I'm in the class of 33. How many of you graduated in a... Well, wait, let's do this first. Class of 50 or less, where are you again? Like 40 or less? Keep your hand up. 30 or less? This is going to be interesting. Look around. 20. How many did you have? 22. Wow. Watch this. How many graduated in a class of over 100? Over 400? Over 500? Oh my gosh. Over 600? Pat, how many?
700 and change.
Could we have different experiences between 22 and 700 and change? How many of you lived in towns less than 700 and change? And yet here's the cool thing, we can honor all those differences. How many of you learned something that your partner is passionate about? Is passion important today for all of us? Okinawans have a word for it. They call it ikigai. And I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, but you know what it means? It means to be connected to the reason you get out of bed in the morning. How many of you, honestly, and don't weigh in on this, and don't ever raise your hand if it doesn't fit for you, and I'm not invested whether you do or not, or concerned whether you do or not, but how many of you really want to make this community better at embracing differences? You have passion about that. How many of you really want to be better yourself and be a role model and lead by example and model the way with inclusion? I'm going to say the 60, some of us in this room, if we leave here and we really focus on that, I have no doubt that we can make tons of ripples. Just like Edith did, one person did. By the way, they started a scholarship in Edith's name. She's been gone now for 30 plus years, I think. And last I counted, she contributed to, I think the number was over $6 million has been left in her name. So don't think you can't make a difference. Don't think it can't start with one person. I'm going to encourage you to just take these ideas and put them into action. Is knowledge power? And this is common sense stuff. I spent 30 years in higher ed. I don't think knowledge is power, and I'm being completely authentic and honest with you. It only becomes power when we do what? We got to use it. We got to put it into action. We got to do something with it. If we leave here, and we are creatures of habit, and we go back to what we've known, we're going to get what we've got. And for most of us in this room, it's pretty okay, and it's probably pretty good, but it's not the best we have to offer. So even those of us that are pretty good at this, we always have to continue to learn and to grow. How do you see the world? And I'm going to go through this like really quick, but you'll absorb it quickly. So what I want you to do right now, and this slide's off a little bit, but I want you to look in this area right here and right here and keep focusing, and I'm going to make a suggestion to you. Stare at the spaces in between, and I want you to see if you can see something. And I don't know if with it being off with the PowerPoint, if you can, typically you can. Anybody see something there? Raise your hand if you see. Some hands are going up. I'm going to even tell you what I want you to find now. I want you to find circles. Look for the circles. Raise your hand and keep them up high if you can see the circles. Raise your hand. Look around the room, everybody. Keep your hands up. And more hands are going up. Look around. Look behind you, in front of you, the side of you. Let me ask you something. Are there really circles there? How many times have we seen something, but it really wasn't happening? It wasn't what we saw. How often does that happen? How well do we let our own biases and our own histories create what we see and what we experience? And oftentimes it's just going on inside of here, and it's not even really happening. Which table is wider? This one or this one? This one or this one? And when you're done with that one, which one is longer? This one or this one? And of course the answer is what? Anybody know? They're the same. So that should say unconscious bias or implicit bias. What's unconscious bias or implicit bias? Anybody know? We all have them. What would you say?
We don't think about them.
Yeah, they're subtle, we're not even aware of them, but they're biases that are usually ingrained from us from our early learning environment. So I grew up in northwest Iowa, and at that time, the only skin color was Caucasian. There's no African Americans, no Asian Americans. There was no one of any other skin color. Do you think that impacted biases in my life? And then my folks were divorced. There was one moment of hope where my parents got back together. My dad was living in Tulsa, and all of a sudden we moved from this little town of my graduating class of 33, and we were living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we're walking down the street, and the messages my dad was giving me about black people were prejudiced and they were biased. But I remembered my own earlier experience. When I was about 6, I got burnt really bad, and I had to go to Iowa City, which was the major city in Iowa. So I got like scars all over here, and I spent like 4 months in a hospital. My mom was able to come see me one time in 4 months. I was missing my mother. She had 12 kids to take care of, by the way. And then I was only supposed to have one major surgery, one major skin graft, and then in comes this doctor, calls me Mr. Crowley at 7, scared the heck out of me, and said, I'm sorry to inform you, you're going to have another surgery. I was like my brothers. I was tough. I held it together until he left. I went back, and I would like to say it was my room, but it was a bed, and I pulled the curtain around it, and I lost it. And I began to cry, and I began to sob, and I was hurting, and I was lonely and scared. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, entered what I would call this woman, who was an angel, and she asked permission if she could touch my hand, and she touched my hand, and she held my hand, and she began to sing songs to me, and she asked me my name, and I learned her name, and this woman was the first African-American person that I'd ever met in my life. That experience outruled the stuff that I was taught when I moved to a big city about prejudice and bias and discrimination. We always have choice. Here's what happens though, if we don't explore our unconscious bias and implicit biases, they get in the way. I'll tell you more about that on a personal level in a moment. So right now, I'm going to give you lots of words. You're just going to do this individually. We're not going to be sharing any of our thoughts. But when you see these words pop up, I want you to be open and honest and just pay attention and answer yourself. So when your first thoughts, when you think men are, answer it and be truthful. I'm watching a lot of nonverbals. Edward T. Hall says 90% is nonverbal. I got some of that. Women are. And we could say in our community, in our workplace, in our family. African Americans are. Latinos are. By the way, is there any negative thoughts about those 4 groups of people at all? Do you think people have negative thoughts about those groups? Asians? And all you're doing, you're just kind of doing your own examination. By the way, you could Google implicit test online, and matter of fact, I would recommend it. I would challenge you to do it, because I thought I was without conscious bias after doing this work for 20 years. Took that test and whoa, baby, I got some work to do. Seriously. Poor people are. So I grew up poor and welfare, and boy, I'm going to tell you, I get defensive about that one. I've been working since I was 10. Usually I had 2 to 3 jobs my entire life. I don't know how not to work, but that's not what most people would answer with that one. By the way, I didn't sign up to be a welfare kid. My mom didn't ask for that. She didn't ask for a husband that had a terrible mental illness that no one knew how to treat. Caucasians are. LGBTQ are. Do you think we have judgments about any of these groups? Native Americans are. And this list could go on and on. Teenagers are. Teenagers should say parents are. Police officers are. Show of hand and be honest. How many of you, with one or more of those, you've had some negative experience and negative thoughts? Raise your hand, pop up. That's where we got to start, and then we got to begin to be open to changing that and connecting with that. How many police officers are in here? Law enforcement. Could it be fair to say that there's people that have a negative experience of law enforcement, and so then all law enforcement become that? Have you ever met someone, what's your name? Jason, have you ever met someone who had a bad experience with law enforcement, but after a personal connection, maybe you helped be the pivotal person that changed that for them? I'm going to bet most of you do that. We can do that with all of these, but it means for us, we have to be open-minded and non-judgmental and accepting of others. So we all have them. There's nothing wrong with it. It just means we're human. The worst thing is that we have them and do nothing about them. Self-disclosure, and I don't like talking about myself, but I'm going to share this story, and I'm still embarrassed by this, to be honest with you, and it happened when I was in my 20s, and I'll be 61 shortly. When I was in grad school at a university near here, I was a hall director, and there was a dear friend of mine by the name of Wally Morgan, who was from Nigeria. He was sent there not just to become a teacher, but to be certified to teach teachers in his country. He was finishing his graduate degree to do that very thing. And he was harassed in the dormitory by some Caucasian guys, and it was simply because of his skin color. And it was one event after another and one after another. And so we would intervene and we would speak to people and we would stand up for him. But boy, didn't stand up good enough. Could have done much better. It was one weekend and some guys got drunk. Somebody threw up in a 5-gallon bucket. It ended up in the janitor's closet on a Friday night, and it sat there Saturday and Sunday. Imagine how stinky that was. And then one of those guys, students, took that stinky bucket, leaned it against Wally's door, knocked on the door. Wally opened his door, and her face got it. It just flooded the entire room. It was a compound effect. He had enough. What would you do, by the way? What would you do? What would you do? Well, answer me, somebody. What would you do? He chased the guys down, caught one of them, had a letter opener in, put him in a headlock, said, "Leave me alone. Leave me alone. If you don't leave me alone, I'm going to kill you." This guy pressed charges on Wally. Wally went to jail in Maryville, Missouri. And I wasn't going to say the community. Maybe we can bleep this part out of the video. Here's the worst part. Wally never left that jail. He got beat to death, and he got killed in the early 80s. This is how naive I was. Shortly after that time, I moved to Sacramento, California. This became a national media story. A reporter calls me and says, "Tim, I'm doing this story. You and Wally were friends." "Yes." "I heard you had some of his belongings." "Yes." "Gave them to his wife." "Yes." "Can I ask you some questions?" "Yes." "Did this have anything to do with racism?" And of course I said no. And I wasn't lying. I was being naive, and I was being honest at that time. I had such blind spots. This is what I learned from my mom. You treat all people with respect. I didn't think that somebody could hurt somebody. So in a weird way, I wasn't paying attention to like my blind spots. We all have them. I've regretted that to this day. I've always stood up for people. I've always been that guy. But I didn't stand up well enough for him. And I have no doubt, had I even done something better, that Wally would have been teaching teachers for years in Nigeria. We don't have the luxury not to bring our best self to every interaction and every situation. So some things that you can do, and this is where we got to start. If you have problems with people of differences, which on that list we just said we did, you got to examine where'd they come from. Who taught you those? Can you unlearn them? Do they really serve you? Do they serve your organization? Do they serve our community? And we've already said we can unlearn, we can do different. This takes work. This takes reflection. This takes being honest and authentic. This takes a growth mindset. How many of you know people that have a fixed mindset and they stereotype people and they'll never change? Gandhi says you can be the change, though. That's what we can do. We can show them something different. And if you have biases right now that get in your way, and you don't have to raise your hand on this one, I'm going to suggest that we do. It's important that you know what they are. Do men have biases with women in the workforce, in law enforcement maybe? What percentages of women are CEOs in companies in the United States of America? 5% or less. I'm going to say there's probably a bias there. Does that make sense? There's only 20% of women that are in C-suite jobs. You tell me that's probably accurate? Probably not. So if I was hiring, I could be on a board and I could hire a female CEO, a person of color. How many of you have ever felt mistreated because of being different one way or another? Raise your hand. Do you ever invite people to learn from you? Do you invite them in? Because most people don't know how to start that awkward conversation. Sometimes we have to start it for them. And if we wait for other people to do it, it's probably not going to happen. But most people people in this room, I think would hear and would listen. We should all do our best to make sure that we're having the conversations we need to have, is where I'm going with this. So we're really just getting started, and I'm going to just move through this really quick because there's something I want to get to. And once again, that would be all lined up. Have you ever heard of micro messages? There's 3 types. There's one that's called micro inequities, and these are such slight, subtle behaviors that we do. They are really small. Most of us never know that we're doing them, but they have a tremendous negative impact on other people. Let's say the 4 of us all work together, and every day I'm walking into the workplace and I'm saying, "Hey, Cindy, how's it going?" And I don't even look at Deborah and her friend. And your name is?
Tina.
Hey, Tina, how about that? Boom. And I'm always just like loving them, and I'm paying no attention to them. What's the message? Does that happen? What happens if I'm just always going to lunch with them and I never go to lunch with them? What's that message? Matter of fact, today, while I'm speaking, another micro inequity would be if somebody begins to do this one, which people just do if you do this one. And pray God, since I had you hide this, if you get this out and start doing, they're just subtle behaviors, and most of them, honestly, we are not conscious that we're doing it, but they can have a tremendous negative impact on people. Tone of voice, it could be lack of eye contact, it could be too much eye contact, it could be just too much fidgeting. So we have to really be aware of all the verbal and nonverbal messages that we send. I'm going to tell you that I've sent messages that have been hurtful and harmful and completely unaware of it. And if I've done that, I'm going to guess most of us have done that. So we just have to develop what I call our emotional intelligence. We have to develop our self-awareness and to be really inclusive. I'm going to go to lunch with all of you. And when I walk into the workplace, I want to be that person that lifts everybody up, and I want to be lifted up. Make sense? There's a handout that fleshes more. Microaggressions are way worse. In my opinion, they're small, but they're usually intentional. It's what that guy was doing, and when he began sharing that racist joke the other, tremendously hurtful on purpose. It's usually words more than actions. Name calling is a lot of it. How many of you know people that do that? How many of you have been around it? The worst thing we can do is to witness it and say nothing. Never be a bystander. And the third one is what Edith Brown did, my mom did. It's microaffirmations, which is really cool, because microinequities, it can be hard to be aware of what we're not doing, but we can do what Edith Brown did. Just be intentional with every interaction, every conversation. Always do your very best to lift people up. Leave knowing something about them. Do your best to point something out, to express appreciation and gratitude for them, a strength, something that they bring to the table, that they bring to the organization. Do your best just to lift people up. Really micro, but huge impact. Less of number 1, more of number 3. Number 2 is never acceptable. So we can just start to be just more aware. So much of this stuff is so subtle. Have you ever been in a conversation and somebody's done this? Have you been the one that's done that? How about that second one? Do you think we're really aware of how we hurt people and in the ways that we hurt people? Raise your hand if you've ever been hurt by discrimination. Do you think people get it? Do you think people know? Could we not be more empathetic and compassionate people? What happens when you're hurt? Do you let people know you're hurt? Why not? Why not be brave enough to have an authentic conversation? If we're hurting, I'm going to say in some level, if Cindy hurts me and she doesn't know about it, I have a responsibility to let her know it. Because most of the time she's probably not aware of it. Not an easy thing to do, right? But if I want a different outcome, I got to be able to be brave enough to do things differently. Now, if I don't trust her and I don't feel like I'm going to get anything back, probably not going to have the conversation. But I do know her. And this is how you have those conversations, everybody. You start with these words. Hey, Cindy, I noticed. And you just begin to say, I noticed. That when I talk to you, you are always doing this. And you're always on your phone. And you ask me to come spend time with you, and yet you're never really with me. And I just noticed, and What happens is it makes me leave regretting that I spent time with you, and I would like that not to happen again. What are your thoughts? She tells me her thoughts, and I say, can we change this? Hopefully she's going to say yes, and then I thank her for the conversation. How well do you do this one? How well do you stand up for people? Do you know where the word bystander came from? New York City. And I'm trying to remember the woman's name, which say it again. Kitty Genovese in like 1964. Got off work about 2 o'clock in the morning. And she was mugged and raped. And according to the news at that time, about 38 people witnessed this. Nobody intervened. Nobody stopped. Nobody helped her, which is unimaginable. And yet that kind of thing happens all over America every day. Tragedies like that where people don't get involved. The guy came back later and ended up finishing her off, and she died from that situation. How many of you can leave here just knowing that you're going to listen better? That you're going to be much better at the art of striking up conversations? That you're going to begin to ask yourself what your own biases are? That you're going to be able to begin to start looking how it's more about you and not other people? Because this is really where the change has to begin. How many of you would be willing to strike up conversations that have meaning? How many of you can be brave enough, if people are hurting you or hurting others, that you can be brave enough to have those candid conversations? That's how we do this better. And how many of you can leave here being like Edith Brown, doing your very best to always make sure that people feel included, and not just accepted, but celebrated? We shouldn't just tolerate differences. We should not even just accept them, we should celebrate them. So I'm just moving on. I want to share this word with you. There's a guy by the name of Kevin Hall, and this is in this handout, which I'll leave by the door when we're finished. The word is Shea. This is what it means. Oh, it already has it on there. Wasn't supposed to be that way either. Never treat another person in a manner that would make them feel small. What if we just leave here all with that? How about that one? Never, ever. Is it ever okay? We make excuses. They cut me off in traffic, so I got to do this. They got in my face, so I got to do this. What if we commit to this word? And by the way, that's not the whole definition. Here's the second part of it. Never, ever treat anybody in a manner that would make them feel small. How about this one? Including yourself. Whoops. What? Throw that away. What the heck? Anyway, the bottom part of that says including yourself. Watch this. How many of you are harder on yourself than you usually are other people? Promise me that you'll change that, because if you don't change that, lots of luck giving away something that you don't have. If we're not really good to ourselves, how can we be that to others? I'm looking at the clock, but I'm going to share another story. And really, I want the story to come from a place of listening, that it will motivate you to always just do better. So my sister Vaughn is one of my closest friends. She's 70 years old. Recently had a stroke, and she's lost a lot of her memory. Like yesterday, I got a text from her, and she doesn't know who I am. I'm clear of that. She's always been a fighter. She's always been independent. She's always been an advocate, never a bystander. She would, like when my trick-or-treat candy got stolen when I was a kid, it wasn't my brother who chased the guy down and got it. It was my sister. Vaughn was she's always been that person. She identifies as a lesbian, and she is comfortable in her skin and comfortable sharing that with people. She lived in Berkeley, California, and she had a flat tire, and a guy stopped to help her, and he was very kind and helpful until he discovered her sexual orientation. And he nearly beat her to death because of it, just because of that difference. Did that have anything to do with my sister? Anything? It had everything to do with him. And yet, if we continue to be bystanders, if we kind of show up, if we play it small in life, this community, it doesn't get better. In closing, I want to challenge you individually and all of us collectively to leave here being more mindful, more intentional about embracing differences and to see differences as something actually to celebrate and to appreciate and give language to them and to validate and to lift people up. To do your very best to be like Edith Brown, who was not only a difference maker, but a ripple maker. To really embrace our differences and create that sense of belonging and caring and inclusion. If we do that, does this community not become better? Can we do this work? I'm going to leave a handout with 10 actions that you can take. Here's your assignment then, if you're saying yes. I'll leave it by the door. I want you to do this. For the next couple weeks, just take one of those, and every week just focus on that one idea. So you got 10 different things that you can do over 10 weeks. If you do that and they become habits, everyday habits of living, your impact goes up, your influence goes up, your leadership goes up, and I believe your contribution goes up, and our community's better for it, our families are better for it, you're better for it. In closing, thank you for being here. Continue to do this work. This is a lifelong journey, and this really is just stepping into this really quickly. Thank you so much, and I want to honor everybody's time, so thank you so much.